Hey everyone, welcome back to Redneck Coachworks. As promised, I'm going to get into a little bit of the Hemi Swap, what's involved, how easy it can be, how complicated it can be, and just some of the do's and don'ts and what you should look for a donor for your swap. So we'll just get going here. I'll just show you on the Hemi here in the Fargo. I've shown quite a bit of it, but I haven't explained a whole lot. So when you get into these swaps, what you're looking for is a complete donor. A write-off is a good way to go because you know it was a running vehicle. Unless it was hit really hard on the front and broke some of the engine components, that you'd have to be really careful because it can push crankshaft back and do all kinds of stuff like that. But on the 28 Dodge that I did, that was a Chrysler 300 5.7 Nag 1 automatic that had hit a deer at considerable high speed and did a lot of front end damage, but nothing to the motor other than breaking the radiator, the AC condenser, and taking the belt off the engine. That one had about 225,000 kilometers on it. Ran really good. I never got to hear it run until after I took the engine out and started it on the floor. But that was an $800 purchase off of our local Craigslist, which is Kijiji, and a good buy. Now, the Nag one that comes in most of the cars is not a good choice unless, even if you live in the US, it's going to cost you lots of money to run the Nag one because it takes a lot of computer. It has its own computer, a standalone computer. It has the body control module, ABS module, and I believe there's another module it needs to operate, as well as wheel speed sensors. So it's not a good option, just too expensive. On the Dodge, I used a first generation Dodge overdrive transmission, which is the RH46, compared to the RE46, which is electronic. So the RH is all hydraulic driven and really easy to use. All you need is a flywheel adapter, which is about 160 bucks Canadian. So while that was 4 years ago, it's probably quite a bit more now. But on the Fargo here, we purchased a Chrysler Aspen, a 2008, which is a loaded up Durango with a whole bunch of extra options. It was an SGI write-off, Saskatchewan government insurance, and had some minor hail damage. We drove 165, 170 kilometers to pick it up. Jumped in, turned the key, had a one-day permit, and we drove it home here to do the swap on it. So we knew that one ran good. It was right around the 225,000 kilometers as well, which I believe is around 110, 120,000 miles. Both the engines were in really good condition, so that's not an issue. We could have put those engines straight in without doing anything to them, but on both the Fargo and the Dodge, we chose to tear them down, new gaskets, new oil pump, new timing set, clean everything up just to make sure it was all good, and splash a coat of Hemi orange paint on them. That's just an added, I guess, peace of mind is why we did it, and it works well. Now on the Aspen, I was able to use the transmission that was in it. It had automatic four-wheel drive, but the really cool thing about it's a 545 RFE is the transmission. They used the exact same transmission in two-wheel drive Jeep Commanders, two-wheel drive Hemi pickups, and some of the earlier Hemi vans. And those ones have a tailstock. I think it's held on, it's either 10 or 12 bolts. You unbolt those, you pull the transfer case off, That tailstock has an integral output shaft that bolts right on with a coat of silicone, and you've now got a two-wheel drive transmission. There's a big electrical plug you take off the transfer case, which is tied to the body control module, so affects nothing in the running of the transmission. Makes it really simple. Those tailstocks are available on eBay, considerably cheaper for you guys down there. For me to get one up here is about $300. They're selling for, I don't know, 160, 170 bucks US for you guys down in the States. So pretty cheap option, and makes that part of the swap really simple. The other thing is when you find your vehicle, if you don't have the room to store the donor vehicle, I recommend you get as much wiring as you possibly can out of it. You need the entire engine harness. Just leave everything plugged in. The pickups are the easiest ones to do. They have one large plug that plugs the engine harness and the computers into the body. You undo that plug, or take as much wire as you can on the truck side, on the body side of that harness, and cut the wires there so that you have wire left over. You're going to need the electronic gas pedal, and as much of that wire as you can get, and the data port that's under the dash where you hook in your OBD2 reader. And that's all you need from your donor. If you have the donor, there's a lot of little things that you can take off of it. We used power steering hoses, we used all kinds of little stuff. The reason I still have the donor here is because I wanted to make sure we had everything off of it before I got rid of it. Now I'm going to part it out and get what we can back from it. So to pull the engine and trans, all you have to do is, like I say, disconnect the transfer case, and on the Aspen, instead of one big plug-in, it's got two smaller ones. This is a C105 or 108. And then on this side, this is the other one. I think this is the 108 over here. This one ties in all your throttle and everything that goes into the cab. The other one is where your power comes in to power up the computer. The computer itself is always mounted usually on the left side, behind a bunch of plastic and stuff. You want to grab the computer and as much of that wiring as you can. Most of it will all come out with the engine harness, except for the white plug, which has a bunch of wires that go in for your throttle as well. So that one you want to grab as much wire as you can on that one. So once you have everything out of the vehicle, out of your donor vehicle, you can do what you need to do, clean it up, whatever. As far as mounting it, it depends on your, just put you back in the tripod here, on what you're swapping into. On this particular vehicle, there's lots of room under the hood that gets eaten up really quick. You can cut a 1/4 inch plate that'll bolt to the block, or you can use the factory mounts and cut them off and weld your new mounts to it. There is kits out there for doing swaps on some of the popular stuff. It kind of limits you on what you can do for mounting and everything else, and it can make it a little bit more difficult or easier depending on your skill set. If you're pretty decent at welding and fabrication, it's pretty simple just to make your own mounts and everything. This is using stock Chevy clamshell mounts. I just built a bracket that fits over top of them to bolt to the Hemi. And then on the transmission, the actual cross member out of the Aspen worked. With the transmission mount, I just had to drill 5 extra holes to mount it. Once you get everything mounted and set up under the hood, the only thing you're going to need is to run a small engine fuse box. This particular one has 4 circuits, so I just have a spare one here. There's 3 relays. With the 545, it has its own relay to power up the transmission, an ASD relay automatic shutdown, which supplies power to the computer, and then a starter relay. That's the only additional wiring I had to add under the hood. In your computer, there's 4 plugins. The one on the far right is a green one. It powers everything for the transmission. The next one is a white one, and it does a lot of talking to gas pedal and such. The next one is an orange one. Runs most of the fuel injection and coils and stuff on the engine, and then the black one brings a lot of your power and everything in. Now, to figure out what you need to do in those is pretty simple. There's a site called Mopar Connector Repair Kit. If you click onto that site, I just wrote it down here, Mopar Connector Repair Kits. You go in, gives you a search box, you select the year and the platform, whatever your donor vehicle is, and once you open it up, it will give you a list of every electrical plug-in on that vehicle. You can usually tell by looking at them which ones you need, but for the most part, I use the throttle body plug-in. Just getting you back in the tripod here, sorry guys. I use a throttle body plug-in, the gas pedal plug-in, the 4 plug-ins that go into your computer, and then I have the 2 body plug-ins, the C105 and C108 off of the Aspen. On the, I can't remember what the number of that plug is. I think it's a C100 on the pickups and a C300 on the Chrysler 300, but I'm just guessing at those. Can't remember, it was too long ago. So once you get, you figure out which plugins you need, you can print those pages off, and what it'll do is show you every pin. I'm just going to set you up here over at my desk. Yeah, my desk. We'll call it my desk, but it's actually, I think it's my wife's picnic table. I stole it, and I don't think she wants it back now. Okay, I just had to get you rearranged here with my with the tripod. So, going to this moparconnectorkit.com, or not, Mopar Connector Repair Kits. Once you find the platform, this is what I meant by the pinout sheets. So this one is the C1, which is a black connector with a black face. You have a black connector with a white face, or natural they call it, black connector with an orange face, and a black connector with a green face. The orange face is the one that talks to the engine, to all of the sensors and stuff. The green one is always the one that works on the transmission. So when you get this pinout sheet out, what it does is it shows you all of the pin locations. So looking at the front of the plug-in itself, pins 1 through 10 are across the top, 11 through 18, or 19, 20 through 28, and 29 through 38. And below that, it'll continue on, and it tells you what every one of those pins does. Bring this in a little closer. So here we have pin 1 is coil control for number 8 cylinder, and so on. Goes all the way down, shows you your grounds, battery, where power comes in, where power goes out, and everything that you're going to need to make this engine run. So the black one is fairly important. A lot of your power and stuff comes into it. The natural one is the white one, and it carries a whole bunch of, like I said, all this app stuff is your gas pedal, the signals back and forth, power and such to it. It also gets some power from the ASD relay, and you have 2 choices for starting. You can start through the computer, and use the computer to activate the starter. Or in my case, on both of these vehicles, I chose to use an external relay and just an old school ignition switch. I find that a little simpler, and then you're not relying on a bunch of different sensors and stuff that could be it could be looking for a signal coming from a body module that you don't have anymore. So in HP tuners, you can shut the internal start system off with just the click of the mouse. Makes it quite a bit easier. So these ones, when you get to stuff like that you don't need, up here in Canada, we don't have to worry about emissions and crap. So long as a vehicle is registered as an antique, at least in Saskatchewan, whatever year that vehicle is, the emission standards for that year is what you have to meet. So on a 28 Dodge, I don't have a lot of parameters to meet. So you can shut off all of your evap purge, your EGR system, and you can either pull these pins out of the plug-in, or you can just leave them alone, unplug that device, and just seal up the end of that plug. Just leave it tucked into the harness somewhere. Makes it fairly simple. Rear O2 sensors, you don't need those. You have to have the front ones to run the fuel injection system. So the two plugins that you're gonna, or the one plug-in, depending on what your donor is, this is those two, the C108 and C105 that I was telling you about, the ones that tie the body to the computer and the engine harness. So these are my working copies. Now, what I recommend is any wires that you pull out or don't use, mark them on your sheets and save these sheets for future reference. If you ever need to change something, it's a really good idea to look back at what you've done, what you haven't done. So on this one, the C105, the one on the driver's side fender, is the important one. To make this engine run, you have 3 hot wires that two hot wires that are ignition powered, a constant 12 volt, and another ignition wire that is start only. Once you have those, you can start this engine sitting on the floor. It doesn't care. So you have pin 16 is constant battery. It's fused. It runs right to a bus bar that brings power from the battery. You have fused ignition, run start. So there's power at that one whenever you turn the key. There's one that's start, and this is the one that screwed me up so bad because I was using the wrong ignition wire. It only puts power to the computer when you're in the start position. And then one more up here that is fused ignition. It's start, run, and off. So with those 3 hooked up, your motor's going to run. For the transmission, this is where the power comes back to the computer from my relay for the transmission. This one here is the 12 volts that turns the transmission relay on. So there's only 2 wires to run the transmission there. So it's pretty simple, that part of it. It looks really intimidating when you first get started. When you start cutting into your donor vehicle, because there is just the main harness that goes through the firewall is probably this big around, and there's just hundreds of wires in it. Most of them mean absolutely nothing to you. They're for all of the safety crap and everything that's built into the vehicle. You don't even worry about them. Like I said, you want to make sure you get your gas pedal wiring in your gas pedal, your data port, and as much of the wiring off of either the single body plug or the double body plug so that you can run your wires. You need 3 solenoids, or relays, sorry. Well, depending on the transmission you use. If you use an older style transmission, you need an ASD relay, and you need a starter relay. And the computer also runs your fuel pump relay, which is 1 wire that comes out of the fuel pump, or out of the computer, and it grounds the fuel pump relay. That's really simple. As far as HP tuners goes, what I did, and for you guys in the States, you don't have to go to that expense if you don't want. You can go to take your factory computer, which you know works. It ran for 200 or 250,000 kilometers in the vehicle. Send it to DIY Hemi Sublime Technologies, I guess they're called now, and they will reprogram it and unlock it for you for, I think it's $250 US. Send it back to you, and once you've got your engine transplant done and your wiring hooked up, you can plug that computer in and turn the key and it'll fire. My Dodge was a good example of that. I tried a local guy, well, local as in 4 hours away. He reprogrammed the computer, screwed some stuff up in it, locked it so I couldn't fix it. So I ended up sending it back to him. He gave my money back, and I bought a computer and program from DIY Hemi, plugged it straight in, turned the key, and it fired right up, and I've been driving it ever since. The other thing is, if you really want to be simple, DIY Hemi sells a complete harness for the truck engines, and some of the car engines now, they're about $750 US. For us up here, it's pretty cost restrictive for us to buy those with duty, taxes, and exchange. By the time I got that $750 harness up here, I'd be close to $1,800. So it just doesn't work. The other options is Holley makes a complete harness you can run with their fuel injection, but $2,500 US. We're way up there now, 3,500, 4,000 Canadian. So for the few modifications you have to do to the wiring, I feel that modifying the harness yourself is a really good way to go. For me, HP tuners cost $425, I think it was. I can buy the credits and I can unlock as many computers as I want. DIY Hemi has done a couple of really good videos on unlocking and getting things going. It took me about 20 minutes to unlock the computer for this, for the Fargo, and put it in, and if it hadn't have been for my screw-ups, it would have fired right up. The other thing you can do in HP tuners, you can go in and you can shut off all your emission control, your rear O2 sensors. You can change the start program so that it starts externally from the computer. You can change tire size for the transmission, all that kind of stuff. As far as actual tuning, it's not something I'm going to get into. I don't have the patience to learn how to do it. And if you start playing with timing and fuel mixtures, you can explode one of these engines in the blink of an eye. So I'm not even going to touch that stuff. I'm going to go with the basics because they run really well the way they are. And with the open exhaust and stuff, we've already bumped them up about 30 horsepower from what they were factory. The other thing that you can do, and I found this to be a real help, is if you go to a pick and pull yard, or if you have another place where you can go get parts, I set up a bench programming station so that I can do all my programming. I take the computer out of the Dodge or out of the Fargo. I put it on the bench here. I have an OBD 2-port data port. I have the black plug, a battery, a couple of fuses, and a toggle switch for an ignition switch. Your OBD 2-port on this particular one has a whole bunch of extra wires and stuff that you don't need. The only thing that you need is your CAN bus, positive and negative. The way to tell those is they're a twisted pair. You have 2 grounds and you have a hot wire that comes into it. That's the only thing you need from that. Your black plug has a constant power. It has a switched power. It has 2 grounds, and that's all it requires. So one quick thing on the OBD2, the reason I say get as much wire as you can is to make these twisted pairs is pretty hard. So you want to get as much of that as you can, because normally you want to plug or have your data port in the cab, somewhere close to the driver's side. So whatever amount of wire you're going to need for that, you want to try and get it. Well, the other thing is we found that if you have more than about 12 or 18 inches of OBD2 wire, or the CAN bus wires, you're not going to be able to read out of this port. The reason being is somewhere in the vehicle, the donor vehicle, there is a resistor between these two lines that is between 60 and 120 ohms. So once I get this wire run, and I have to run on the Dodge, it's probably 6 feet long, and on the Fargo, it's probably close to 8 feet long, is I soldered a 100 ohm resistor right between the two CAN bus positive, CAN bus negative, and that allows you to read with the longer wires on it. That was the only modification I had to do with that. So once again, it's pretty simple. So long as you take your time, really study these pinouts, it makes a big difference. Just understanding what each pin does. Depinning the plug-ins or the wires from the plugs can be a bit of a pain in the ass. I've shown it in my video a little bit about undoing the locks and then feeling where the release is for the wire to be able to pull it out the back. Shelby Dog is a good resource on YouTube. He's done a couple of videos on pinning. He has some charts with the wiring. The wiring varies a little bit from vehicle to vehicle. This one wire that I had, this pin 30 that was hot on start only, the Dodge doesn't have it, the Fargo does. So that was a little bit of a problem for me trying to figure that one out. And then there's some other wire differences from Shelby Dog's video, but again, a little bit older. So the other thing you want to do is stay away from the 03, 04. The computers are too old a generation. There's not a lot of support for them. You can't do any tuning changes to them. They're just not a good place to start. So 05 to 09 is 05 to 08 is the third generation engine. As soon as you get to the 09, it changes to the Eagle, and there's a bunch of changes in plugins on the computer and stuff. Up to 2014, we can still unlock using HP tuners. Once you get to 2015 and newer, there's some tricks and stuff that hasn't been passed down the line yet, from what I understand. So anyhow, guys, that's pretty much it. Mongrel Garage is a good resource. He's got some videos, DIY Hemi Sublime technologies, and I'm here to answer questions. I'm by no means an expert at this. Before I did the Dodge, I thought that electronic ignition wiring was complicated. So it's not that bad. Don't be afraid of it. Just jump in there, get her done. Let's Hemi swap the world, as Blake says, and go from there. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope this helps. Hope it helps you make a decision to jump into doing a Hemi swap and get out there and buy those write-offs that are really cheap. So take care, guys.